Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Titan, 2nd edition, by Jez Cajiao. Narrated by Wayne Mitchell. Prologue. What? Barabaratus, Lord of Hymnal, he spun on the unfortunate victim of his ire, voice dropping to a low growl. What did you just say?
Well, you see, my lord, the messenger stammered. The gods, they said,
Cletus! Barabaratus screamed. A few seconds later, a dark, cloaked figure materialized from the gloom obscuring the back of the room, stepping free of the heavy black velvet curtains, as though lingering there, out of sight, was perfectly normal.
"Yes, my lord?"
Cletus Thane asked calmly. "Is this true?" the fuming lord hissed. "Some thieving nobody has raided my city, stolen my ships out from under me, stripped my stockpile, and murdered my citizens, all while you caroused and chased tavern wenches?"
"It appears so, and he's not exactly a nobody. You did declare war on him, after all," Cletus replied unconcernedly. "I do vaguely remember seeing the Legion storm past while I was being sick in a gutter, actually."
He rubbed his eyes and yawned, filling the room with a stench of stale ale and vomit as he strode forward. "Gods, man!" Barabaratus gagged and waved his hand to dispel the fumes. "I'd have you killed for that."
"If you could,"
Cletus finished for the city lord, shaking his head. "We both know you need me, my lord, and until you no longer require my services, I am irreplaceable. Besides, if you killed me, who else would act as your representative in certain deals?" The seething noble glared at Cletus, who smirked before glancing at the thoroughly terrified messenger. "He knows too much!" Barabaratus snapped at Cletus, who turned and smiled lazily at the messenger, who paled at the sharply pointed teeth he revealed. "True," the pale man said languidly, then burped again, wafting the foul odor away from his face and looking confused.
"Well, I don't remember eating that. Oh, well.
Sorry, old boy." Cletus's right hand flicked out, and a thread of black light flashed across the intervening distance to splash across the messenger's face, bursting like water before solidifying and emitting an evil red light. The messenger started to scream, frantically grabbing at the silken strands that joined his face to the creature's hand and trying to pull them free. The pained screams only rose as the skin of his hands became bound to the inky material. More and more of his life force was torn from him, carried down the threads to Cletus's hand in flashes of dark red. It took a bare handful of seconds, time which seemed far longer for the messenger as he collapsed to the floor, writhing. Soon enough, the thread released, retracting back to Cletus's wrist and disappearing as he casually lowered his sleeve. The corpse crumbled slightly as even the chemical engines of the cells failed, starved of energy.
"By the dock, lady, that's better,"
Cletus muttered, wiping his face with the palm of his hand. His pasty white complexion had darkened to a light olive, and his teeth gleamed as he smiled, the points glittering as they shrank back down and resumed their normal, human appearance. "I didn't give you permission to indulge your filthy habit in my presence." Barabaratus gestured angrily at the husk that was laid on the floor. "Get rid of that, and find out what the hell happened last night. Gather your team and go. Use your test subjects and get me back what is mine."
"Why,
"Of course, my lord," Cletus replied sardonically, dropping into an elegant low bow with his arms held out to the sides. Then he snorted and strolled off to vanish into the pre-dawn darkness of the citadel. Cursing, Barbarata summoned a servant to dispose of the corpse that Cletus had so arrogantly ignored.
"Send someone to the Dark Legion!"
He snapped at the quivering servant as the man tried to drag the corpse from the room.
"Ask the High Priest to attend me at his earliest convenience, and send in the head of the guard, and my headsman!"
He threw himself into the tall, wing-backed chair by the window and glowered out at the city, gnawing on a knuckle in frustration. No matter what he did, everyone was going to hear about this, and that was all he needed, especially after the months, years even, of work he'd put into smearing the Legion. Everything was ready. A few more weeks, and he'd have been able to kill them or absorb them into the city guard. Either way, they'd have been out of their damn enclave, and he wouldn't have to worry about anyone finding out about the caves underneath it anymore. Although that, at least, was true now, since they'd fled the city.
"And send for the city planner! I need to start building!"
he roared abruptly, ignoring the servants who frantically huffed and puffed as they dragged the fully armored corpse out of the door. Chapter 1.
I woke up slowly, blinking at the light that filled the cabin. Oracle's hair left behind a tickling sensation as the gentle breeze from the open porthole sent it drifting across my cheek. I frowned for a second, shifting slightly, and smiled to myself as my brain caught up with the events of the last day. Well, several days, I supposed. With the amount of time I'd spent unconscious, it had all blurred into one for me. Oddly, I reached down and felt her warm skin under my fingers, causing her to stir as she realized I was awake. The world, hell, my reality had changed so much in the last few months that I'd never seen this coming in my wildest dreams a year ago. But as she shifted around, propping herself up and looking down at me, I couldn't help but smile, happy beyond anything I'd ever known. I was in love. Oracle was stunning. Not just physically, though I had to admit that was definitely part of the package. Her ability to adjust and alter her physical form, and our sharing our minds, meant that she was able to be exactly what I found most attractive and arousing at any particular time. The part that I loved most, though, wasn't her looks or her figure, as much as last night and this morning would lend the light of that. It was her mind and her soul. I'd spent forever worrying about us taking this final step, becoming partners in the bedroom as much as partners in mind and companionship, despite us both wanting it for ages. One of the reasons I'd remained unsure had been the whole master situation. I was literally the High Lord of Draveth, Lord of the Great Tower, and she was bonded to me as a companion. That bond left me quite firmly in the position of overlord, with all the responsibility and power that entailed. Taking advantage of that power to satisfy my needs sat a bit wrong with me, especially as when we'd met, she had been an amorphous wisp with absolutely no sexual experience or capacity, really. That had changed when I allowed her access to my mind, and she'd picked a form she discovered that I'd like. Unfortunately, to do so, she'd scanned all the women that had made a lasting impression in that way in my mind. As I was in my early 20s, and had, like most of my contemporaries, spent a lot of time wrestling with myself, literally, while watching porn, she'd managed to make herself so beautiful that an entire generation of Hollywood starlets would cry themselves to sleep over comparisons, complete with a figure that made a certain Kardashian look flat-chested and boring. The combination of her body and my own subconscious reactions to it, and the fact that she'd spent years observing the various races that inhabited the tower, watching them do everything from talking shit to trying to break each other in bedroom Olympics, and, well, she felt my hormonal reactions, and because we shared our minds, it had a hell of an effect on her too, turning her from curious to obsessed, and I certainly hadn't helped it. With my mind and body being injured so much of late, my self-control was practically non-existent. I thought back to the girls in the barren citadel, shaking my head unconsciously. I'd been a prisoner, and they'd worked there under the control of a magical gesh as maid companions. Once I'd realized the gesh compelled them to do as I ordered, I'd been very careful not to ever order them to do anything. One night, they'd explained honestly, even bluntly, that while the gesh could compel them into bed, and some had used it that way, that wasn't why they were having sex with me. It wasn't simply because I was fucking irresistible and hung like a horse either, unfortunately for my ego. Instead, it was a mixture of the girls liking me for me and a bit of planning that could only be defined as mercenary sensibility. The girls knew the Baron was a monster, a noble of the Underverse who was hell-bent on returning to this realm. Those who pleased him would be taken along, and whoever actually secured the great portal to the Underverse would become a prince of the Empire at the very least. They essentially wanted to guarantee their own futures. The girls were recruited from pleasure houses and brothels around the world, trained to serve the nobility, and paid a decent wage or stipend. If they wanted more, they needed to catch the eye of a member of the nobility. They'd basically laid it all out before me as a business proposition, in a sense, and they'd admitted that they were the ones using me. I got all the fun I could handle, and if they managed to catch my eye more, then they got the lives of pampered courtesans in the Underverse, provided, of course, I survived and won. If not, so sad, too bad, and next, please. It had taken Oracle and me some time to really understand what was going on between us, and she'd grown emotionally, as well as physically, in the time we'd spent together. Her consciousness had evolved from an almost childlike curiosity to that of a full-grown woman who was comfortable with what she wanted. Wonderfully comfortable, I reflected, admiring at her naked figure as she sat back upright and straddled me, smiling, as I remembered the night we'd just had. She brushed her hair back from her face before pushing her lower lip out to blow an escaped strand of hair upward with a light puff, then smiling down at me. Her hair had shifted from a golden blonde when I had fallen asleep to a deep, lustrous red this morning. Her skin pale, soft as silk, and her muscles taut and firm. I sat up, taking her in my arms and kissing her, reveling in the sensations of her gently biting down on my lower lip and shivering as I ran my hands down her back to settle on her full and firm ace.
"Lord Jax!"
A familiar voice called from the door, followed by a heavy trio of thumps that rocked the thin, hastily built wall, let alone the door itself.
"Are you awake? I'm coming in."
The door opened before I could so much as break the kiss, revealing Grizz, who paused, then grinned. "Get out, Grizz!" Oracle and I both ordered. He shrugged, his cheeks reddening as he got an eyeful.
Sorry, boss, and sorry, boss lady. Augustus sent me to see if you were alive, and, well, you are."
He kept grinning, partly out of relief and partly because Oracle was admittedly a hell of a sight. "Out!" Oracle repeated, throwing our shared pillow at his head as he laughed and closed the door so quickly the entire wall shook. "Think that was deliberate?" I asked Oracle, sighing. "Him walking in or them sending him?" she countered. "Yes," I said, shaking my head. "Both, I mean. He deliberately walked in, probably not thinking about it, or thinking he might be able to wind us up with something, and probably saw more than he expected to. I'll guarantee you that Augustus and whoever else wants us would have suspected what he would do. Sending a blunt instrument rather than a scalpel to do a job does work, after all.
It's just messy,
she said. Shall we get him back? I asked, grinning.
Oh, definitely. And Augustus, too. I think Helenica will help us there. You know she likes him, right?
God, yes. It was a bit blatant, I replied as she leaned back slightly, arching her back and making sure I got a hell of a view.
So, shall we get dressed, or...
She raised one eyebrow and glanced down suggestively.
Jax, I'm sorry to interrupt, but...
Grizz's voice filtered through the door.
Prefect Romanus said he needed you on the bridge, if you were able.
He's fucking listening to us, isn't he? I said flatly to Oracle.
He really is,
she agreed, crossing her arms in annoyance. I summoned a fountain of clean, cold water by the doorway, causing the water to splash and run under the door as Oracle fired off a particularly weak lightning bolt. I watched with silent amusement as she deliberately adjusted it into a zap rather than a stunning effect. Gah! Grizz screamed, followed by the satisfying sound of a huge, fully armored legionnaire dancing out of the spray.
He deserved that,
Oracle huffed regretfully as she shifted, resuming her normal diminutive size. Her wings lifted her into the air, a short black halter top and hot pants materializing to cover her assets. I sighed, dropping my feet over the side of the small cot to rest on the wooden deck, staring after her regretfully as I muttered, "Down, boy," at my crotch. The airship changed direction slightly, the engines firing in a controlled burst before dying away to a steady thrum as the room shuddered faintly. I shook my head again, standing and stretching, while a multitude of tiny pups and clicks protested the night spent on the cot. It was small, tight, and while better than the floor, the benefit wasn't by much. We'd actually managed to break it twice overnight, and the rudimentary fixes weren't likely to hold a third time, so I folded it up and leaned it against the back wall. Grabbing some boxes and tugging them on, I couldn't help grinning as Oracle made exaggerated eye rolls and wolf whistles at me. "We can't all just magic close up, you know," I said, hopping on one leg as I pulled my drow gloom spider silk pants on. They were a lot stained and scruffy, but they were undoubtedly the most comfortable clothes I had. As I dressed in the rest of my gear, casually pulling armor on and settling weapons into place, I reflected on the fact that going everywhere fully geared for war was the new normal for me.
You ready?
Oracle asked as I checked to ensure that my various sheaths and pouches were all secure, twisting at the waist to make sure nothing was caught on anything. "Yeah, come on," I nodded to her. "Time to go play with the Legion, I guess."
Just remember, they might be a bit reserved with you. You're the Lord to them, but most don't know you yet. They just felt the bond become active, and the upper echelons recognized that you were their best chance for survival. While they'd never attack you due to the oath, it doesn't mean they're automatically going to love you either. You're still going to have to earn their respect.
"Oh, no," I agreed, recalling my first encounters with the Legionnaires I had grown close to in the arena. We struck gold with Augustus and his team, and we still lost a lot of them in the Sky King fight and escape. Now we need to make them understand that abandoning everything was worth it.
Don't forget that you are their lord, though,
Oracle said quickly.
You're not there to plead with them for support. Give them orders, but, I don't know, be nice?
She lifted her hands in an uncertain gesture. "Wow, that's helpful, Oracle." I laughed. "At least I've got you to keep me on the straight and narrow."
"Yeah, well, I've never been in this situation either,"
she quipped, smiling at me as her cheeks tinged with red. "Well, we'll face it together," I said firmly. She nodded in agreement, flitting over and landing on my left shoulder as I picked up my naginata and headed for the door. I pulled the door open, looking out into the corridor and trying to ignore how flimsy the whole thing felt. Grizz was standing a few feet away, grinning at me, while two unfamiliar legionnaires stood on either side of the door, fully equipped. "Morning, I guess," I said, looking from one to the other. "I hope I didn't get either of you with that spell." They both straightened, clapping their fists to chest in salute. "No, Lord," they said in unison. I winced, looking questioningly at Grizz, who shrugged. "Right. What are your names?" I asked. "Legionnaire Weston," the one to the right barked, closely followed by the one on my left barking out. "Legionnaire Holtic." I noted the ramrod straight backs, the gleaming armor, and the slight sheen of sweat on their faces. Weston was dark-skinned with a beard that bristled out of his helmet as though looking for someone to fight on its own. Holtic was paler, with almost Nordic white skin, no beard, but a chin I could have used as an anvil if I was so inclined. Beyond that, they were practically identical, the same height and everything. "Is this a joke?" I asked Grizz uncertainly.
I'm afraid not, Jax. And sorry again for that.
He nodded toward the door with a grin, making me think he'd really just been oblivious to interrupting us.
It's standard that nobility be guarded when under the protection of the Legion. In your case, they were assigned to guard you for this shift, and they don't really know you yet, so they're on their best behavior, that's all.
"Bollocks," I muttered. "Right then, let's have this out now, as I've no doubt I'm going to be saying this a lot from now on. Yes, I'm the High Lord of Dravith. Yes, I'm the Imperial Scion and heir to the Empire. No, I'm not a prick who needs sunshine blown up my arse." I met both of the guards' eyes directly, my tone firm. "I want you both to relax. As you've seen from this pillock here," I said, gesturing to Grizz, "I'm not one for formalities. Hell, he just walked in on me and my partner naked and got a pillow to the face as a consequence. It was only when he was being a filthy bastard and blatantly listening at the door that he got his zap for it, and even that was a warning, not a powered one. Despite him deserving it twice over for that ugly mug." The pair stood frozen at attention for a few seconds, then exchanged a look and slowly seemed to relax, nodding in slow acceptance of my words. "I take it you've been assigned as a bodyguard for me?" I pressed, and they nodded in sync. "Not just assigned to watch over the door, I mean, as it's a kind of shitty door."
"That's right, my lord," Weston said formally. I shook my head before giving in.
I was the High Lord of Dravith after all. I needed to start accepting that the role came with certain shitty downsides. "Right, well, if you two are out here, I'm hoping that means that Bane and Tang had a night off," I said aloud, peering down the corridor.
"I wish,"
came a voice, and I turned to find Tang leaning against the wall support where I'd have sworn a second before there had been nobody. "You better not have been in there," I growled, gesturing at the door to my cabin.
"It's okay. I left when you and the Oracle got distracted," he said, shuddering excessively.
"Well, fuck you too, mate. I told you before, stay out of the bedroom, or you'll see sights you don't want to," I snapped, unsure if I was more amused or irritated.
"Yeah, well, you were brought on board unconscious and severely injured, so we thought it best to watch over you. Didn't expect to see that. Certainly not right after downing a potion of Legionnaire's might."
Tang shook his head in amazement. "Well, more for you then," I said, shrugging nonchalantly. "Which way to the bridge?" Tang gestured over his shoulder with one thumb.
"This way, boss,"
he confirmed, straightening up and shooting me a wink.
"Seriously, though, it's good to see you upright, and even better to see you clothed."
"Bah! You'd love a mustache ride," I retorted unthinkingly, earning a laugh from Grizz and quickly stifled snorts from Weston and Holtic as we started off down the corridor. I glanced about as we went, realizing that the unfinished and flimsy look that dominated my cabin was the same out here.
The structural walls and main girders were clean and beautifully made, while the smaller walls that served to separate our rooms seemed hastily put into place, with nails sticking out in random places, boards only being held together by the bare minimum, and jagged, unsanded wood everywhere. I gestured to a nearby doorway, which had a pair of planks nailed across the frame and an X, and nothing but open air beyond, the wind whistling frantically and tugging at our clothes as we passed by. Is the entire ship like that?
Yeah, this is the battleship, Jax, Grizz pointed out, shrugging as we continued walking. It's huge, and damn, it's amazing. Nothing this big should be in the air, you know. It's nowhere near finished, though. A year or more at least, I think. They hammered it together just enough to escape the city, and that's it. The main hold is where the majority of people are bunking, and these sections are off limits. There, at least, it's secure. And while there's not much space between all the passengers and gear, there's at least a lot of things to hold on to when the winds get bad. We decided it was best to give you a little distance from the majority of the people, plus, you know, they're not Legion, so we can't trust them.
He finished darkly. Oh, crap. Grace, seriously, they'll be sworn to me soon. That means you'll have to trust them, you know? I asked. He nodded hesitantly.
Until then, though. Anyway, a bunch of us got together with the shipyard workers and put the walls and door on the cabin for you. It was mainly to keep you as safe from any possible assassins as we could, that's all.
Well, thank you, Grease, and anyone else who helped. I'd definitely prefer a room to sharing. I winked at Grizz when I caught his grin. Shit. My amusement immediately dampened as I peered through another open door that led out onto a small walkway above the clouds. I kinda hoped it was better than this, I admitted.
Seriously, it's amazing this thing flies at all, Jax, Grizz said, grinning.
You're really not helping. You know that, right? I asked.
I owe you one, you know. For back in the arena.
He shot me a grin. I snorted, remembering getting everyone to cheer him. It had been a shitty joke, just something to wind him up, but that had obviously started a competition. We headed up a set of narrow stairs and turned right, passing deeper into the ship as we passed through larger, wider corridors. The walls were noticeably built with far more care, the feeling of imminent collapse vanishing as a sense of impressive solidity was conveyed instead. Every 10 meters or so was a recessed section in the roof, which I guessed were designed for holding mage lights, and spaces had been marked out for banisters, presumably in case of rough weather or fighting. Instead of these fixtures, though, the spaces were occupied by piles of gear, thousands of planks of wood, ingots of metals, and the countless minor things that turned a ship into a home, never mind a platform of war. The items were piled as neatly as could be, strapped together, but here and there the strapping had come loose. We clambered over materials that filled the corridors, while sailors and engineers swore and rushed about around us, carrying armfuls of parts, or metal or wood panels, obviously working to seal up as much of the ship as possible on the go. Most had no idea who I was, but the few who did recognize me, or more likely, noted the escort and drew the correct conclusion, straightened up and saluted, frantically trying to avoid eye contact. "They're afraid of us?" I asked Oracle quietly, not bothering to communicate through our mind link.
You're a lord. They know what happens if they get a lord's attention in the wrong way,
she replied sadly. Fuckers. I growled under my breath, making a concentrated effort to smooth my features and smile at those we passed. Tang led us along a winding route through the bowels of the ship before guiding us up a set of wide stairs choked with equipment. Nearly 10 minutes after we'd left the cabin, we finally reached the ship's bridge. A pair of legionnaires on guard duty straightened, clapping fist to chest in salute as we approached. Tang strode forward, opening the door without knocking, and ducked inside, then stepped to the side and straightened before formally announcing to the room at large.
"High Lord Jax of Dravith, scion of the Empire, heir to the Imperial throne."
For the first time in as long as I could remember, his voice was clear of the sardonic wit, the sarcasm in general, I've seen it all before attitude. Instead, it was clear and proud, and as I stepped into the room, I saw the effects his words had on those gathered inside. The room was filled with people who had clearly been managing the business of flying a ship that likely massed hundreds of thousands of tons, maneuvering it safely through the air high above the sea. However...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?